The other day, on the way to the town, I stopped here in Castle Street, overlooking the IDR, that's the Inner Distribution Road, and my thoughts went back to a day in the mid-60s. While standing in this same spot, I noticed the post office that the grocers had gone, along with Holt's, the fish shop, and Griffiths, the furniture shop. The great clearance for the IDR had started. Little knowing that in later years it would look like this. Looking up Castle Street now, we can see the Horse and Jockey pub, and the building that was Blundell's. This still stands. Though in 1966, Blundell's had an extra building. This was beside the pub. Their main building is hidden behind White's taxi garage. Next door to White's is Hutchinson's, the tobacconist, and then Lyne's, the confectioner's. I think Mrs. Lyne moved up to Wesley Road when this place was demolished. Next you can just see the edge of Len Watts, who had a shoe repair shop. Following on down Castle Street from Len Watts is the entrance to Bartlett's Cottages. The shop on the other side was a dress shop. It was run by Mrs. Goodchild, though I believe she moved out a long time before this picture was taken. However, her neighbour, Trustram's, the grocer's, was well known. Next was Young's, the rope and tent manufacturers. Beside them is the entrance to Pine Court and Stafford Terrace. The last building before the clearance is Avery, the scale people. Now, all of that is gone. Looking up Castle Hill from this position, we can see the south side. This side of Castle Street looked like this in 1967. Haddock's, the builders, was on the corner of Coley Street. That's a road that's been swallowed up by the development. Further up is the Kennet Arms, one of the many pubs that also disappeared. Beyond that, you can just see Robin Garage's second-hand car depot. Now, let's look at the other side of Castle Street and see how that's changed. Here it is all cleared down, right from 96, which was Avery's building, down to Great Passage. The other side of Great Passage is the famous landmark of Vincent's. If I remember rightly, they started here, then they moved away to the station, coming back here afterwards. 2 doors down, you can just see Mitchell's, the confectioners. Now, standing here at the junction of Coley Street, we can look down at all these buildings. They were all still there, right down to the church. This was in September 1967. Turning right, we can now look down Coley Street before it completely disappears. On the left is the Salvation Army Hostel. That was built some time before. But gone is the Rose and Crown and the Blue Lion. Here's a last look at those pubs, which were the hub of Old Coley. It was a Sunday in 1966 when this picture was taken. You can see the Salvation Army bandsmen coming up from their citadel in the butts. On the left is Star Service betting office, next to the Truro pub, with Beacon House, the offices of London Assurance, on the corner of Boarded Lane. On the far corner was Kedge's, for clothes and things. Then there was Sutcliffe, with antiques. Seaby had rural crafts and wool. Then Cecil Keeling had Reading radio supplies with the post office. Parslows the bakers were next, and Higgs the Lion Brewery, before coming up to the Sun, which is here today. By 1972, demolition was well on the way. These are the empty buildings of Nash the Jewellers, Anstey the Butcher, and Townsend the newsagent. The betting shop, then the Truro, right down to Boarded Lane, while beyond was completely down. In the next few pictures, watch out for the churches. Just over 2 years later, in January 1975, the building of the courts and the police station are well underway. In June of that year, the shape of things to come were quite noticeable. See, the roof of the police station was in place. Further down, the red brick of the magistrates' courts contrasts with the old buildings of the Sun. Looking back up Castle Street, and now we come up to date. Note the doorway on the left. It's the one with the porch, number 43. And we will see just what all these new buildings on the right have replaced. Taken in 1966, the lower left-hand side of Castle Street is much the same. But memories flood back of those on the right. From the Truro right up to Vincent's in the distance. Boarded Lane. Beacon House on one side and Kedge's on the other. Again it's a Sunday, as the metal gates across Kedge's doorways. Looking down Boarded Lane, you can see the back corner of St Mary's School in Hostel Street. But by October 1972, most of it is gone. The new car park of what was the Butt Centre stands out with Tesco's name below. Beacon House is still there, along with the old brewery, but Boarded Lane is now closed. So let's go back to 1966 and take a stroll down Boarded Lane. Halfway along the lane on the left is Flint Street, part of which has already been demolished. But beyond is a fence, and that was Hostel Street. Beyond that, it's just possible to see the outline of Soho Street. The buildings behind are the back of Callis Sons of May and Oxford Road. In 1972, Flint Street looked like this, mostly demolished. But as it was before the police station was built, the new Salvation Army Citadel can be seen in the distance. However, our amble through Boarded Lane brings us out to Hostel Street and St Mary's School. The children that lived around here and went to this school must have many memories of this place. Further along Hostel Street, past the chapel, is the Butcher's Arms. Looking now towards St Mary's Butts, there is the Abbey School of Motoring, then the model shop. The clothes shop at the end used to be the Dolls' Hospital and toy shop. Of course, all this area has now been taken over by the market. In St Mary's Butts, you can see the other buildings that have been taken over by the market. There was Thornton's, the bakers, right down to the timbered building on the left, which at one time was Summerscales, the fish and chip shop. Along the Butts from Hostel Street is the old Salvation Army Citadel. This was still standing in 1976, as was part of Holmes' store next door. On the other side of St Mary's Butts, many will remember Bayliss's Corner. In the early days, everyone was served individually, and there was no waiting at checkout. This area has been rebuilt, and in 1990 we have Laura Ashley. Crossing over to the corner opposite, we have spread out before us the Broad Street Mill. And this is what it replaced. Taken in 1968, we start with part of the White Hart, then Oxfam, Hearts, Essex the Outfitters, Westminster Bank, and on the other corner was Langston's, who in early days had their name in lights. But between these buildings is Cork Street. So whilst we're here, we'll take a look down there. Cork Street's a cul-de-sac, with Langston's meeting Reading Garage's showroom and works. This was for their new cars. Within months, Reading Garage had gone. But this made it possible to see the east side. And in the centre are the old stables of the White Hart. Back in Oxford Road, this is how it was in 1966. There was Houseman's, the baby shop, Shoecraft, John London hairdressers, the gas company had a showroom there, and finishing up in the corner with Watt Cycles. Where the building juts out, that was P.A. Baker's television. On the other side of Oxford Road, the old McIlroy's building housed Page's Dresses, the Midland Bank, Cyril Lord Carpets, then Premier Supermarket. This was the first supermarket I remember seeing in Reading. Looking further down at the shop that stands out, that was Dunster's, the shoe shop. Let's take a closer look. Dunster's was on the corner of Thorn Street. The whole of this side of Oxford Road, right down to Alfred Street, has gone. Oxthorne House has replaced Dunster's, and the IDR, with its bridge, has swallowed up the rest. So let's look at these shops and buildings that were there in 1966. Next to Dunster's, a hairdresser, Catherine, and then there was Field, the tobacconist. Connors with their dresses. Next door was the entrance to what was Jackson's scrapyard, though I think at this time they had already moved. But next was Bollum's, the cleaners. They were still there, along with Reading Motor Accessories, on the corner of Alfred Street. Dunster's went round the corner into Thorn Street. This is where they had their repair department. Very assuring to have personal supervision with your shoes. Next door is Gibbs Furniture. And back to today. Back to the past, for one last look before the JCBs arrived. By September 67, change was well on the way. We paused to recollect what was here before the IDR. Of course, Ramada replaced Callice's, but let's look down the rest of Oxford Road. Next door was Maker's Furniture, then Haslam, the estate agents, Butler, the chemist. Rent-a-Set was next door to Radio Rentals. Then Sam Cohen, Pope's Dresses, and the greengrocers that used to be run by the two Miss Dummells, but in 1966 it was Brown's. Onward to Jasmine House and Manning's Furniture. Then Miss Godden, the tobacconist, Sewmaster with sewing machines, and this came right up to Dunlop's, which was on the corner of Howard Street. Looking down the other way from Callice's was Robert News TV and Radio, Eggleston's Shoe Repairs, Parslow's, then Chrysler's the Jewellers, Lawrence the Newsagent, Carter's Travel. Aldridge had bearings and things there. Then next door was the Sandwich Bar, but in this picture I think it's the entrance to the car park. Next was the Oxford Restaurant, then Edelson Sports, which takes us right up to Baker's TV. You can always pick out this building by its copper dome. Before Sargent's moved here from West Street, Drew's, the wholesale tobacconist, had it. But in 1966 it was Sargent's. The rest of this side, with Connors and Bollum's, it goes down to Alfred Street, with Alfred House on the left and Reading Motor Accessories on the right. This, as you can see, was originally Tibble's Bakery. Alfred Street in those days went right through to Chatham Street. Up Howard Street, behind Dunlop's, in 1966, the Wellington Arms stood. This was on the corner of Soho Street. 4 months later, the site was clear, with a view across to the nearly finished Chatham Street car park. May 68, they had dug out the way for the IDR, right up to the bridge. By November, you could see daylight under the bridge. One of the advantages of all this demolition is that there are views of some buildings that were never possible before. McIlroy's, as even the architect never saw it. Or St Mary's School. These are but fleeting glimpses, as the work is now on construction. And back in 66. But also in the background is Flint Street, and nearer the outline of Hostel Street. This is where Hostel Street came out into Howard Street. That's Body Road straight on, and Baker Street to the right. Looking across to Castle Street, you can see Haddock's offices. The gap to the right is Coley Street. Now, standing here on the corner of Coley Street, I can look back to the start of the IDR. Well, where was I? I remember, I was off to the town. Coley, a part of which had already disappeared. But nevertheless, the IDR has swallowed up many more roads with their houses. Watch the Salvation Army Hostel on the right as we turn the clock back to 1969. Here the bulldozers are disposing of Coley Street. This was the main road in. The building in the centre is a Rose and Crown, still standing, though I believe now at this time it was closed. However, we can see where Coley Street was in relationship to the IDR. As we return to the scene, the right-hand slip road almost follows the site of the old Coley Street. Note the house behind the Salvation Army Hostel. That's Holybrook House, as we take a closer look. It's May 69, the road's closed, but its route beside the Holybrook House can clearly be seen. Looking back, Coley Street wends its way past the Salvation Army Hostel. But gone is part of Willow Street and Wolseley Street, along with the Blue Lion and the Rose and Crown. Here in 1967 is a last look at these two locals. The Blue Lion is on the left and the Rose and Crown on the right. From Coley Place in March 1969, you can see the site where long ago was Beaujeu Square and the Workman's Hall, which was alongside Union Square. Then on the left again, the Rose and Crown still stands. As we look to the right, this is the main area to be taken for the IDR, with Willow Street in the centre, joining Wolseley Street and Coley Street. The dark track on the right foreground shows where the Coley steps used to be. The white building in the centre is the Borough Arms in Willow Street. Now for a closer look. September 67. The railings border the Holybrook. The turning on the right this side of the bridge is Brook Street West, while on the other side of the bridge it was Brook Street. All this is now gone. Willow Street, the pub and Brook Street. to March 1969, with the entrance in front to the old Central Goods Station. As seen in July 1967, the north side of Willow Street. This looks as it had done for years. But what are the people who lived here? There was Sawyer at number 13, Miss Mary Richardson at the shop, number 17, Stacy at 21, and Gibbons at 23. Then, much earlier, Mrs. Nugent rang the caff at number 35. At the far end of Willow Street, and round the corner into Wolsey Street, was Coley Stall, here hidden by Brickfield Terrace. These houses in 1879 were the only buildings in this part of the road. The winter of 69-70 saw the bridging of the Holybrook. This is near where the Borough Arms stood. At the same time, the supports for the footbridge were in place. Transformation of Coley was well on the way. By August 72, the bridge was finished. Yet in the distance, part of Old Coley still stands. Let's go to the end of the bridge for a closer look. Here is part of Henrietta Street. The nameplate is on the side of the end house in Willow Street. Behind this is the demolition of Bright Street. And in the distance, the bridge of the IDR crosses a Kennet. Watch this as we update this area. June 73. The old houses of Coley have been replaced by prefabs until it's redeveloped to become the Holybrook site. The road surface of Willow Street still remains. Above it, the IDR crosses the river to the Southampton Street flyover. In doing so, it is now swallowed up part of Catesgrove Lane. For back in April 69, this is how Catesgrove Lane came out into Southampton Street. Today, as the traffic approaches this junction, they are driving not only over the end of Catesgrove Lane, but all the buildings between it and Munsley Street. April 69. Number 24, that's this side of Munsley Street, was Teletronics. The other side was number 22, that was Hockley. Back in 1947, there was a coffee shop run by Mrs. Seabrook. However, let's follow the development by returning to the present. Now let's take a stroll over to the centre of the roundabout. As we look back up Southampton Street, we can see the new buildings that were Munsley Street. On the far left is a tree, and behind it a light-coloured wall. This is the side of the Red Lion, and it can be seen as we go back to September 1967. The wall is next to the posters on the left. The junctions of Munsley Street and Catesgrove Lane are clearly visible, like the trolleybus wires on the left, as they turn into Mill Lane. We're now looking up Bridge Street. December 66. The buildings on the left were used as workshops by the brewery before being demolished. Now it's the widening of the bridge in Bridge Street. Looking back up towards Southampton Street, it's noticeable
how narrow the bridge over Kennet was. The balustrade in the centre of the road was the left-hand side of the old one. Also on the right, the path turned outwards. The new bridge will be twice as wide as the old one. Seen from here, the clean lines of the flyover are quite attractive, but it has swallowed up the whole of the south side of Mill Lane. Let us look from this same spot while we turn the clock back to 1966. In the foreground, work is underway extending the under-road bridging of the mill stream. In early days, this stream fed St Giles Mill, which stood where the bus garage is today. Mill Lane then was only a narrow path alongside the stream. This was covered when Mill Lane was widened. In the back are some of the premises on the south side, all of which have gone. There was Runham for plumbing. Next was Todd's Lino. It was here we got our floor covering when we were married in 1947. Following on down was Trinder and Manning, the bookies. Then after a few private houses, there was Hope, the undertakers. Smith's Coaches had their head office there. Then their white building on the far left was part of Burberry's, who were known for their famous raincoats. Watch this as we look across the newly formed roundabout in May '83. The white building is still standing on the corner of Letcombe Street. That's a road that's been shortened with this development. Phase 1 of the IDR was finished. Further work was at a standstill for lack of money. By October '85, all was back on course. Here, on the north side of Mill Lane, the old tramway's power station is seen in all its splendour. Further down are the bus garages. A closer look in the 90s brings us to the east end of Mill Lane. This part has altered little, except for its junction with London Street. Back in September '67, the junction of Mill Lane and London Street was much further south. This was because the extra buildings, these were Brennan's, who dealt in ex-army and government surplus goods. Numbers 16 and 18 were burnt down one morning, and as London Street was then a main road into town, many were late for work. Watch the corner of number 14. This was taken in July '91. Looking now towards the town, watch again the front of number 14. That's the end building on the left. It's September 1967. The nearest building of Brennan's is on the corner of Mill Lane. The trolley bus wires show this. Watch these as we take a look at the other side of London Street. The blinds are out of English leather. They're on the corner of Queen's Road. This shows the distance between these two junctions. Keeping an eye on the corner of Queen's Road, we'll watch this area as it's developed. March '71. We step back up London Street for a wider view. Till's Caff is the last before Queen's Road, and with Brennan's down, Mill Lane is now opposite. It's now March '86. with the roadworks underway. The English leather building looks extremely drab, but this demolition has given us a good view of the Queen's Road garage. Looking back up London Street, across this now busy junction, it's hard to recall this scene before. It was the narrow entrance to Queen's Road in September '67, with Ronald Wing's tobacconist shop on the other side. Next door at 15 was Reading Transport's Parcel and Lost Property Department. Then York's the bookies, followed by the very old building of Till's Caff. Reed's Office Furniture was the last you see in this picture. By March '71, Wings and the Transport Office had gone. A new entrance to Queen's Road brings York's onto the corner. It's now possible to see beyond Reed's to Persins's timber outlet, and then on to 29 and 31, which at this time was Long Lamps. This building has been many things over the years, such as Little Miss Muffet's junkets, and at the turn of the century, along with Persins's two shops, it was Long, Son and Everard, a high-class drapery store. Watch number 33, the building with the columns, as we take a look at this site today. All cleared to number 33, but with the addition of Wessex House. Let's take another look back. This shows that the new building of Wessex House replaced Persins's and Long Lamps. Taken in December '76, with Wessex House built, the old Caff, now William Smith's, and Reed's are ready for demolition. But before that, let's take a look around the back. Behind are these old timbers, which I understand are Tudor. But nothing must stand in the way of progress. Watch the new building behind. For now, trees grow here, while the traffic roars by. London Street, one of the oldest roads in Reading, until now has altered little over the years. March 1971. The buildings from Till's Caff to 33 are still there. 33, with its dominating columns, when built, was the new public halls, founded in 1843, opened and much used by Charles Dickens. On this site before was the Southern Counties Library, founded by George Lovejoy, who transferred to 39, later adding 37, and here now as William Smith's. Behind here is Sims Court, where in early days there was the Quakers' Meeting House, which was associated with William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania. Further up London Street, near the top, and on the other side, is this rather drab building. But back in 1975, we have a part of Reading's industrial history. These are some of the buildings of Huntley, Bourne and Stevens, the tin and container makers for Huntley and Palmer's biscuits. For it was just opposite, at 121, that Huntley sold his first biscuits. The plaque over the doorway confirms it. Missing here, though, is the old premises next door. Let's take a look back. Isles, one of the last pawnbrokers. Here for many years. Note the shutters with their little slits, through which the local bobby at night could keep a check. That's That's now history. Looking now across the corner, we see London Road. But in 1966, they were ready to pull down Gowings, the Ford service garage. They had been here since 1922, taking over from Scurry's, who moved there from Friar Street in 1920. Until 1920, Targets, with their stables, were here. I believe they kept spare horses for the fire engines in the butts here, and changed horses for the London to Bath coach, while hiring out many hacks and traps. Here, the feeder road at the London Street IDR interchange follows almost the same line as did the Queen's Road from London Street. Look back to 1967. Notice the back of the building this side of London Street, the one that juts out. That was Wings, a newsagent. Then on the left was Belle Jarvis's School of Dancing. Over those garage doors is a sign, and it says The Black Horse. This was a well-known inn. It had its entrance in London Street, and during the Napoleonic Wars it was used for recruiting. This narrow entrance to Queen's Road was made in 1835 by pulling down 3 houses, then occupied by a butcher, a blacksmith and a silk manufacturer. In 1990, the IDR swallowed up 12 properties and 18 outlets. From here, the size of today's gap is very noticeable. Now, let's look back again to the old buildings that stood on this site in 1969. The first on the left was the Vets, run by Mrs. Conn, with 4 others. Next was Mowright, with lawn mowers. And then Gordon Wilson had car accessories. This brings us right up again to Belle Jarvis's dancing school. March 1971. Standing here was a well-known shop of the English Leather Company. You can see Yield Hall car park in the background, along with 8 and 10 London Street, which was then Hugh Wiley. Looking down to the left, the layout of this part of Queen's Road can be seen. In the background is the spire of the Methodist Church in Watlington Street. Watch this. While on the west side was Earlco, electrical wholesalers, later Gaydor. Amongst their many supplies was Exide batteries, and at that time one of the few in competition with Eveready. Today, East Street is sealed off. This part is now in the centre of the IDR, with nothing to show where any of these buildings have been. So let's return to 1971. Also in this picture is the Queen's Garage, but next door, the wooden building, is a very old company. Now for a closer look. It was Messrs, the timber firm. They'd been here since early in the last century. Next door is the little old porter cabin of Smith's Coaches, later taken over by Horseman's. Further along Queen's Road is Wesley Gate, another block of offices. But in '89, they were pulling down the houses, number 70 to 80, which were at one time Hickey's service department and rodent control. It was Fowler Lee, who sold bottling equipment such as Kilner jars. Then in the late 20s, the last house in the block was a private school run by the 2 Miss Ruffles. Ah well, back to the present. Opposite is Clarendon House, with 3 lines of traffic hoping to negotiate this junction of the IDR. But back in 1972, it was a much quieter place, though the sign of things to come were reflected by the number of houses boarded up. At one time, the shop on the corner was a shirt retailer. Next door lived Mrs. Goff, then Albert Butler. Luscombe's ran the sweet shop. Following on down was Godfrey Witherall, Mrs. Lord, then Parsons, and Cecil Rowe, just to name a few. All have had to go. Further along in 1987, with the traffic one way to the east, we come up to the next area for demolition. This is to become part of a one-way system, in reverse. A closer look again in 87, and they're packing up in the Alicante Cafe. They're going abroad to live, while all the rest are all boarded up. By 1990, all had gone. This area now is opened up to King's Road, and the traffic flow reversed. But there is one reminder of the past. That's a tree on the far right, by the corner of King's Road. Watch it as we go back. This tree was beside the last building, which had been, for a long time, Wyatt's Radio. Looking back now in 87, to the tree, and in the distance down King's Road, the old Huntley and Palmer's building. Watch the tree again, as this area is cleared. It's 1992. From this angle, we pause to recollect what in the past was here. Turning the clock back to early in 1987. A number of places were closed, but let's remember some of the shops that had been here over the years. From left to right, Wyatt's Radio, then Star Furniture, Argus the Cleaners, Stokes for Flowers, Jennings Newsagent, Hughes the Chemist, Oliver's Radio, a washatera, finishing up with the Borough Arms on the corner of Kennett Street. On the other side of this street, and to the far right of this picture, a new building is taking shape. Watch this. Now completed, this building is called Royal Court. Let's take a closer look. Looking back up King's Road, with Royal Court standing on the bank of the Kennet, next to the bridge. It was on this site a well-known printer stood. The year is 1968, with traffic going in both directions. And as you can see, the printers were green slates. How everything's changed. So is the junction of Forbury Road, Watlington Street and King's Road. Here again, we can reminisce with the past. The year's 1984. The corner shop was at that time an Indian restaurant, though in earlier days it was Cox, the butchers. They used to have whole sides of meat hanging outside the shop. But pollution levels were different then. Watlington Street in the same year. This road to be turned into 4 lanes as part of the IDR. So 2 more landmarks had to go. Firstly, number 79, the shop on the corner. While behind us, Forbury Road, with its similar bridge, waits the IDR developers. 4 lanes now replace that narrow road. Back in 1987, Kings Point was almost hidden, behind all those buildings on the west side. Among them were Toms the stonemasons, Waggets the butchers, not forgetting the end houses in Blake's cottages. But up by the prison, we look back to this part of Forbury Road. Watch the church. The road is dual carriageway. The old bridge is gone, and there stands a massive prue. Forbury Road, looking west, with the prison on the left and Queen's House, that's the place that used to be Metal Box, in the centre. This area has quite a history. For this, we go back to 1987. At this time, Forbury Road was just two-way. The building on the right consists of three properties, 105, 107 and 109. But let's take a closer look at the path beside it. Nothing unusual, one would say, about a railing on top of a flint-type wall. But let's take a look from the other side. Seen from what was a car park, a wall, rather overgrown. But a year later, all the shrubs and trees have been cleared, and now the wall can be seen in all its glory. What is so special about this wall? It's the Plumry Wall, which was the original outer wall of the Abbey. And now it's to be covered over by the IDR. After excavations, when a number of items were found and preserved, the wall was then covered and a new one built on top. This became the centre wall, dividing the dual carriageway. Watch the end of St James's Church at the top centre, as we see just where the Plumry Wall went. This new wall shows that, at least here, the planners have thought of the future. Forbury Road, which is part of the IDR, from the Vaston Road junction. Though in early 87, little old Forbury Road was having its trees clipped, ready for their removal. Now in early 88, the IDR roundabout is being excavated. Little knowing what would be found, as this was the site of the north gate of the Abbey. But there they were, human remains, apparently buried just inside the Abbey grounds. But while viewing this site, our memories drift back to 1975. The Walter Parsons Corn Merchant Building is still there, though gone are the buildings of the Chronicle, Berkshire Waste Paper, John Lynes and the Beaconsfield buildings. From the old coffee store we can see some of these buildings before they're all replaced. While back on the other side is Aldwych House. Today we ponder what was on this corner before. No, of course, it was John Lynes, the paint and wallpaper people. Yet, further round in Blackgrave Street. So let's look back to 1976, when these shops and offices were already closing, ones that had been there for years. Names such as Hedges the estate agents, Fraser's typewriters, Roneo duplicating, National Cash Registers, Royal Berkshire Friendly Society, and British School of Motoring, just to name a few. Further along Valby Street on the other side is Minerva House. Yet in 1981 they were pulling down the building that was the police station, and previously the university, before they moved to London Road. For our next look at the changing face of Reading, we shall take the IDR under the bridge and go.
So let's go up here and under the railway bridge. Looking back to the junction of Tudor Road, and we try to remember just what was here before. It's August 69, with that narrow entrance to Tudor Road, and on the corner was Blanchard the baker's, though in the past it had been Fuller's with a post office. Next was the Indian restaurant, then Harrison's a tobacconist, finishing up beside the railway bridge with the White Horse pub. Then on this side of Tudor Road was Talbot's, the coal merchants. Watch the railway bridge. Turning now and looking up Caversham Road. Widening of the road here has meant rebuilding of all those properties on the left. Watch the junction on the left, Stanshaw Road, as we return to April 1984. This side of that junction was the Britannia Hotel, with Iron Coop stores next door. On the further side of Stanshaw Road was the Britannia Public House. It's May 1968. Number 38 stands out on the corner of Vatchell Road. Let's look along these others before they all disappear. From Vatchell Road there was Allsop's, the corn merchants, then Taylor the tobacconist. And here they're taking down the sign of Kingsway Motors. Now, looking further up Caversham Road, there was a fish and chip shop run by Stockley Fisheries, then Knapp's, the greengrocer. Next door was at this time empty, but in the past it had been Tennant, the ironmonger's. Car services had been next, and then the Hong Kong restaurant. Following on up Caversham Road, at that time was the Bombay restaurant, giving the eaters a choice from the Hong Kong. Then the Co-op completed this row of shops, which went right up to Greyfriars School, with its demolition just starting. From here, all looks as it had done for years. But let's step back a little. Yes, the IDR slip road has already encroached. We turn and look down the slip road. The busy IDR. Here's how it was in 1968. With those shops on the right. Then on the corner of Weldale Street was the People's Cafe. Watch it as we return. Looking across the old triangle to the Prince of Wales pub. That's beside the new car park. Let's take a closer look. September 67. This well-known pub stood on the corner of Thorne Street and Chatham Street. Whilst here, we'll take a look back to 12 months before. Chatham Street, as it had been for years. The large building, along from the pub, was the back entrance of Jackson's scrapyard. Next there had been Grimsby Fish Company, though I think they had gone by this time. Further on, living in a row of terrace houses,
were names of Taylor, Mack, Hayden, Hercombe and Summers. This brought us right up to the White Line on the corner of Alfred Street, which at this time went through to Oxford Road, though in 1966 it was one way from there. All the buildings on the east side are to go. The area is to be rebuilt, with a car park slicing across in 1967. Only a few places on the west side will survive. So back to 66. In the distance, behind the cyclist, is the White Line. This area was built around the 1820s. And here, in 1966, lived families with names such as Green, Turner, Hall, Underwood. Watch the grey-fronted building on the right. As we turn to the right, 2 doors along from this house is a white and green building with its white chimneys. At this time it was Butler's, the wine and spirit merchants. Now it's standing alone, the last original building on this side. Let's take a closer look. Butler started here in 1830 and were the sole agents for the old Reading Abbey whisky. Much of the old building with its character has been kept. Watch the curved top window in the centre upstairs as we look back to an old print. Below this window is the entrance, which has changed little, though the whisky store on the left is now a bar. Leaving the past, no longer Butler and Sons, is now the Butler, and standing alone. Though watch its white chimneys as we go back to 1966. Here, surrounded by a row of houses, a living community, with at the turn of the century occupations such as butcher, baker, bootmaker. So let's take a last look, as it was in 66. It's now possible to see how all those houses have become the south lanes of the dual carriageway. On the other side, in 1966, was Jackson's shop and garage. Beyond St John's Ambulance Hall is a row of 3-storey houses. Then next to these is a light-coloured building. Watch this as we go further down Chatham Street and look back. The black-coloured wall behind the street light on the right is the entrance to York Terrace. And on the far right, the corner of Reading Process Engraving Company's building can be seen. Turning now to the right, just past the engravers is the rest of the north side, with Greyfriars Church in the distance. The blind is out at XL's The Butcher's. Watch this as we look back. From the corner of Thorn Street to all these buildings. The tallish one between the two shops were the offices of Weldell Motors. The shop this side, covered with blinds, number 22, was Mundy's greengrocers. Further along this way and out of sight here was Harry Wicks's furniture removals, finishing up with the original site of Weldell Motors Garage. It's April 1968. Weldell Garage is closed and the demolition has started. 1 month later, and demolition is well underway. We can now see right through to the back and see some of the tops of the red Thames Valley buses. The building on the right was the offices of the bus company. The Adelphi House is on the old Odeon car park site. Watch the top of the Co-op building as we go back. 1966. This is the junction of Thorn Street, Friar Street, Chatham Street and Lower Thorn Street. On the far right can be seen the corner of the Prince of Wales pub. On the farther side of Thorn Street, the large building was in the past a Methodist chapel, while next door had been many things such as the Central Relief Office, Child Inspector's Office, a Medical Centre Office. While in Lower Thorn Street, demolition of the Triangle area is well underway. This site had been a car. But by June '69, excavations of this part of the triangle were well underway. Then, deep down, were these remains. Was it a well, or was it an underground passage? Whatever it was, it reminds us that in 1284 there stood on this site St Edmund's Chapel, and later, when it was in ruins, it became Harrison's Barn, a fort in the Civil War. April '71. This junction for the IDR is now in operation, and the school is yet to be demolished. And with our memories of the past fading, we complete this look at the change the IDR has made to Reading. But there is still more to see of the old town, though for now we must